You wake up to the sound of bells. Again. They never stop. They're like medieval snooze buttons, except they don't actually let you sleep more. They just make you feel guilty for having ever slept in the first place. It's about 2:45 in the morning. That's right, morning. The sun isn't even close to rising. The chickens are still asleep. If this were modern life, you'd still be 2 REM cycles deep, dreaming about being chased by talking squirrels or whatever your brain decides to do after midnight. But no, you're a Benedictine monk in the 12th century now, and that means dragging your half-frozen self out of a straw mattress in a stone cell that smells like damp wool, old candle smoke, and slightly singed regret. There's no alarm clock, no mattress topper, and definitely no electric blanket. Just a lumpy sack filled with straw, your corset robe, and maybe, a second blanket that smells like it's been passed down through 6 generations of tired, shivering monks. You slip your bare feet into wooden sandals, which were clearly invented by someone who hated feet. And off you go, quietly, because you're not supposed to talk. You shuffle in the dark down a narrow corridor that's colder than the local cemetery and just as lively. Your breath fogs in front of you, because there's no central heating, obviously. The only fire burning at this hour is your growing resentment for Saint Benedict and his bright idea of structuring every day around worship, work, and deeply unappetizing meals. Now, before you settle too deep into this charming little trip through medieval sleep deprivation, take a moment, yes, you, sleepyhead in the blanket cocoon, tap that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing who's drifting off in Ohio at 3 a.m. versus who's folding laundry in rural New Zealand. You're all part of this weird, peaceful, history-loving cult now. Welcome. Anyway, you make it to the church. It's dark because candles are expensive and God doesn't need good lighting. You join the others, silent, sleepy, semi-conscious. A sea of identical robes, stoop backs, and quiet sniffles from cold-induced nasal drippage. It's time for Matins, the first of many prayers you'll attend today. Because nothing says spiritual devotion like chanting psalms in Latin while your stomach quietly sobs in the background. After what feels like an eternity, and may literally be one, time is a flat circle in this place. You're dismissed for a short break. Not to eat, no, don't get excited. Just to sit in silence and reflect. Probably on how tired you are. But eventually, as the faintest suggestion of sunlight starts to creep over the horizon, it's time for breakfast. This is where the fish comes in. And not in the fun, grilled on the beach, lemon wedge on the side way. No, this is medieval fish. It is not glamorous. It is not Instagram-worthy. It does not come with tartar sauce or chips or the faintest trace of joy. It is preserved, dried, pickled, or salted to within an inch of its fishy life. You shuffle into the refectory, the monastery's dining hall, which is about as cheerful as a medieval tax audit. Long wooden tables, stone walls, a single flickering torch that makes everything look like a horror film set. No one talks during meals. Instead, one unlucky monk is assigned to read aloud from the Bible or the lives of the saints. Because nothing pairs with salted herring like a detailed account of someone being martyred via hot iron tongs. You sit. You bow your head. You receive your portion, a piece of stale bread that could double as building material and a sliver of dried fish so tough it might fight back. It tastes like salt, regret, and old socks. But hey, protein, right? This, dear listener, is your life now. You are a monk, and you eat fish every single day. Now, you might be wondering, why? Why the fish? Why not mix it up? Why not a little goat cheese, some eggs, a nice medieval fruit salad? Because of rules, that's why. Lots of them. Centuries of theological debate, papal decrees, and anxious monks convinced that eating a chicken leg would send them to hell faster than you can say fasting discipline. In the monastic world, meat was considered a luxury, a temptation, a path straight to gluttony and sin. Fish, however, was the holy loophole. You see, in the twisted buffet of medieval theology, land animals were out. No beef, no pork, no chicken, unless you were very, very sick and someone important decided you wouldn't survive another spoonful of herring. But aquatic life? That was okay. Fish didn't count. They lived in water. They didn't bleed like land animals. Apparently, God looked at a trout and said, "Yeah, that's fine." And so, 6 days a week year-round and every single day during Lent, which, by the way, lasts 40 days, you eat fish. Not fresh fish, though. Don't imagine some smiling monk pulling a gleaming salmon from a stream while Gregorian chants play in the background. No, this is the Middle Ages. You are landlocked. The sea is 2 weeks away by mule. You get salt fish, cod from Norway, herring from the North Sea, eels from some deeply suspicious local marsh. And it has to last. So it's packed in barrels with enough salt to kill a vampire. When it finally reaches your monastery, it's been dead for months and smells like a haunted pier. Before eating it, the monks soak it in water to make it less aggressive. This creates a lovely aroma in the kitchen, part seawater, part footbath. So breakfast is fish. Lunch? Fish. Dinner? Well, it depends. You might get another round of fish or something lighter, like watery vegetable soup with tiny slivers of, you guessed it, fish. You learn to recognize the various textures: crunchy, too old, chewy, undercooked, slimy, probably eel. It's like an endless tasting menu from a particularly vengeful sea god. Of course, there are exceptions. If you're ill, and by ill, I mean clearly dying, you might be allowed white meats, which is medieval code for dairy and eggs. So if your arm falls off, congratulations, you can have cheese. For everyone else, back to the barrel. Meals are eaten in silence. You sit. You chew. You try not to think about how the fish is looking at you with one preserved eye. Occasionally, you wonder what sins you committed in a past life to end up here, praying before dawn and gnawing on what might be a medieval anchovy. And lest you think it ends there, no. The dietary restrictions were a badge of honor. Monks believed their suffering brought them closer to God. So if you hated your meals, good. That meant they were working. If you enjoyed the taste of your food, something had gone wrong. Culinary despair was the goal. Even your cooking was suspect. Meals were intentionally bland. No herbs. No spices. Pepper was expensive and considered indulgent. You weren't supposed to want more. You were supposed to practice mortification of the flesh, a very cheerful concept meaning, basically, make yourself miserable so your soul can flourish. And yet, there's a strange sort of peace in it. You begin to notice the rhythms, the sameness, the quiet. You get used to the soft slap of sandals in the hallway, the distant chant of psalms, the way sunlight slowly creeps across the cloister courtyard. Your body adjusts. Your cravings dull. You stop dreaming of roasted lamb and start dreaming of clean barrels and the slight crunch of undercooked barley. The fish becomes a kind of friend, a constant, a reminder that life is simple, small, and entirely out of your control. You don't need variety. You just need obedience. Or so the rule of Saint Benedict says, in its calm, terrifying way. Now, not all monasteries were created equal. Some were rich, very rich. Think entire estates, serfs working their land, enormous wine cellars, and enough fish stored in their larders to feed an army of ascetic introverts. Others were poor and ate boiled weeds with a dash of pond scum. But regardless of wealth, the dietary code remained. Meat was off limits. Fish was your destiny. And over time, they got creative. You see, humans are experts at bending rules without quite breaking them. So monks invented all sorts of fish-adjacent loopholes. Beavers, for instance, were declared fish by the church because they spent a lot of time in water. So yes, if you're lucky, you might get a beaver tail stew. Congratulations. You're now dining on semi-aquatic rodent in the name of spiritual purity. Barnacle geese, migratory birds that no one quite understood, were also fair game. Because they were believed to grow on trees and drop into the water, the church ruled they didn't count as birds. They were fish. Sort of. Like divine technicalities. So on high feast days, you might get goose meat disguised as piety. Delicious, mysterious, and still legal. But for most of the year, it's back to the basics: dried cod, herring, eel, and something called stockfish, which sounds like an investment product but is actually a slab of desiccated fish so hard it has to be beaten with a hammer before cooking. Yes, a hammer. You, sleepy monk of 1143 AD, are now wielding a club to tenderize your breakfast. Modern you would be calling Uber Eats. Medieval you is just grateful it's not your turn to scrub the latrines. So, How do you pass the rest of the day? After meals, it's back to work. And by work, we mean a rotating list of monastic duties, copying manuscripts in dimly lit scriptoria, tending the gardens, milling grain, brewing beer, because even monks needed to hydrate, and water wasn't exactly safe, or maintaining the fish pond. Yes, monasteries had their own fish ponds, stocked, maintained, and jealously guarded like medieval gold reserves. Then it's back to prayer. Then study. Then more prayer. Maybe another meal of boiled lentils and fish essence. Then prayer again. It's a day designed to wear you down gently but consistently. Like erosion. Holy erosion. You might wonder, did any of them like this life? The answer is, sometimes. Many monks genuinely believed this was the path to salvation. A simple, quiet life away from temptation. No wars, no politics, no Tinder dates. Just you, your fish, and the eternal hope of heaven. But many also struggled. They snuck meat. They complained. They wrote letters. We even have records of monks smuggling sausages into the cloister, which is the medieval equivalent of sneaking snacks into detention. And through it all, the fish remained. Dry, salty, endlessly recurring. A culinary purgatory. An edible vow of poverty. A symbol of everything you left behind and everything you're supposed to gain. And that's just A1. Would you survive it? Well, you're still here, aren't you? Still listening. Still lying there, maybe with one eye open, maybe both closed. Maybe thinking about eels. Or wondering what it would be like to hammer your breakfast. Or maybe, just maybe, you're starting to drift off. Which is exactly what we want. So rest, my cloister friend. The bells will ring again soon. And the fish, oh, the fish, they'll be waiting. You wake up again. Or maybe you never actually fell asleep. It's hard to say. Your straw mattress has developed a unique pattern of poking you in the kidneys at irregular intervals, and the cold seems to be arguing with your bones. There's no pillow, of course. Just a folded bit of wool that smells like it saw the Battle of Hastings and never fully recovered. Outside, the world is gray. Or at least the tiny sliver of world visible through your one narrow, glassless window. It's not yet dawn, but the sky has stopped being completely black and started being the color of old porridge. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster screams its avian heresy into the fog. And just as you think you might be able to roll over and squeeze out one more micronap, the bell rings. Again. This one is for lauds, the second official prayer of the day. It's around 5:30 a.m., which, in monk terms, is basically mid-morning. You heave yourself out of bed like a half-deflated sack of devotion and grab your robe, which is still damp from yesterday's rain, because drying things is a luxury you gave up around the same time you gave up indoor plumbing. You don't complain. Well, not out loud. Complaining is a sin, after all. So you just grumble internally, like a passive-aggressive saint. You march, again, through the corridors, past flickering candlelight and the same crack in the same wall you've seen every morning since you took your vows. The monastery is cold and still. You begin to notice how loud silence can be when everyone's trying not to break it. The squeak of sandals on stone. The occasional cough. The faint groan of an ancient wooden beam deciding, once again, not to collapse today. In the church, lauds is sung with sleepy reverence. The chant echoes around the stone walls like a ghost that learned Latin and got a recording contract. It's beautiful, in a way, haunting and slow and slightly out of tune. You don't understand half the words, but that's okay. God does, allegedly. Eventually, lauds ends and you shuffle toward the next big event, breakfast. Try not to get too excited. The refectory greets you like a damp cave. The air smells like last night's fish, this morning's fish, and the kind of mildew that might be sentient. You take your seat at the long wooden bench and wait as bowls are placed in front of you. You stare into yours, hoping for a miracle. Maybe some unexpected oats? A leftover apple? A slice of toasted hope? Nope. Just barley mush and a sliver of pickled eel. Again. Today's fish is extra vinegary, which could mean it was preserved with wine vinegar, or could mean the storage barrel recently sprung a leak and no one wants to talk about it. Either way, it slaps your taste buds with the loving gentleness of a wet sandal. Across the table, Brother Theobald is chewing in that slow, meditative way that suggests he's either contemplating scripture or trying to figure out if this fish is actually fish or just a slightly fish-shaped piece of rope. You chew too. slowly, reverently, like it's a holy act, which it is, technically. You are eating not to enjoy, but to survive and humble yourself before God. Your hunger is a virtue. Your full stomach is not a goal, it's a sin avoided. And yet, deep down, some traitorous part of your soul is craving spice. A pinch of salt that wasn't already baked into the fish, like an act of culinary vengeance. A dash of pepper, maybe. Some garlic. An herb. Anything to remind you that food doesn't have to be punishment. But alas, you are a monk, and this is penance on a plate. After breakfast, the day truly begins. There are chores to do. Lots of them. Monasteries don't run on divine intervention alone. They run on unpaid labor and very, very organized schedules. You've been assigned to the kitchen garden today, which means tending to the vegetables that will soon be boiled into oblivion and served with more fish. You step into the garden, and for a moment, it's actually nice. The air is crisp. The earth smells like dirt, not decay. Birds are chirping somewhere nearby, possibly making fun of you. You pull weeds, water plants, and check the leaks for signs of blight. There's a simple rhythm to it. Monks love rhythm. Rhythmic work, rhythmic prayer, rhythmic chewing. It keeps the devil out, supposedly. The garden grows things like turnips, onions, garlic, which is medicinal and therefore not for flavor, kale, and beans. Peas, if you're lucky. You're not allowed to use butter. Olive oil is rare. You boil everything until it forgets it was once alive. Sometimes, if the prior is feeling generous or just tired of complaints, you might get lentil stew. With a small garnish of dried, you guessed it, fish. The fish, for the record, is not grown in the garden. No, that comes from the fish pond, which is probably the monastery's most jealously guarded feature. Fish ponds were status symbols in the Middle Ages. Like an in-ground pool, but full of sluggish, apathetic carp instead of inflatable flamingos. Your monastery's pond is moderately impressive. It contains carp, tench, and the occasional pike that looks like it wants to bite someone. The fish are fed leftover bread and vegetable scraps. The water is cloudy and greenish, like soup made by a colorblind alchemist. The smell is exactly what you'd expect from a centuries-old pond filled with fish excrement and holy intentions. Once a week, some unlucky monk gets assigned to net out a few fish. That monk is not you today. Today, you are just gardening, which, in the grand scheme of medieval monastic tasks, is one of the better ones. It's peaceful. It doesn't involve latrines, grave digging, or brewing beer in a room, so hot it feels like purgatory's foyer. Around midday, the bells ring again. This time for sext, the sixth canonical hour. You wipe your hands on your robe, which is already covered in dried mud and some kind of leaf, and head back to the church. The pattern continues. Prayer, silence, walking, more prayer. The chanting lulls you into a state of near consciousness. Not quite asleep, not quite awake. The Latin phrases swirl in your brain like fog. You begin to wonder if maybe this is the goal, not clarity, but trance. A life lived half in, half out of awareness. After sext, you get dinner, which is actually lunch. Medieval people called it dinner. Supper was the evening meal. Breakfast was optional, and depending on how strict the monastery was, might be skipped entirely during fasting periods. But today, you're allowed to eat. You return to the refectory. Sit. Wait. Today's meal is boiled greens, a chunk of rye bread, and, surprise, salted herring. Again. This one has bones. Lots of bones. You learn to chew carefully. One wrong bite, and you'll spend the afternoon coughing like an exorcism in progress. The monk reading during dinner is reciting the life of Saint Cuthbert, who apparently lived on an island, talked to birds, and once ate only onions for 3 months. He is held up as a shining example of holy deprivation. You chew your bony herring and wonder if Cuthbert had better onions than the ones growing in your garden. There is no dessert. There is never dessert. There is only repentance, digestion, and more prayer. After the meal, you help clean up. Washing bowls, stacking wooden cups, and carefully storing leftovers, which is to say, scraping them into a bucket for the compost heap. Nothing goes to waste. Not even your hopes. Then it's time for manual labor. You help Brother Guy repair a broken gate. This involves holding pieces of wood while he mutters under his breath and bangs things with a mallet. It's very spiritual. Eventually, the bell rings again. This time for none, the 9th hour of prayer, which actually takes place around 3 p.m. time, is fake. Bells are real. You return to the church. Kneel. Chant. Your knees are sore. Your back is sore. Your soul is either soaring or trying to escape through your teeth. Hard to tell. The rest of the day passes in a kind of sacred blur. You copy a few lines of a manuscript, ink slowly drying as you carefully write in Latin letters that barely make sense to you. You sweep the cloister walk. You help refill the oil lamps. You try not to think about fish. But the fish are always there, lurking, waiting. By the time Vespers arrives, the evening prayer, the sky has gone from porridge to ash to dusk. Candles flicker. Shadows lengthen. The day begins to sigh its way into stillness. You are tired. Bone deep, soul-wide tired. But you are not done. There's one more meal. Supper. It is, mercifully, light. A small bowl of pottage, boiled grains and vegetables, and a spoonful of preserved eel. The eel is chewy, oily, and somehow smug. Like it knows you have no choice. You eat it slowly, silently, surrounded by 30 other men doing the exact same thing. You don't speak. You chew. You think about Saint Benedict, who started this whole thing. And then, Compline, the final prayer of the day. The monks gather one last time. The chanting is lower now, softer, like the monastery itself is winding down. The lights are dim. The stone walls hum with centuries of repetition. You pray. You bow. You return to your cell. You blow out your candle. And you lie down. The straw mattress hasn't improved. The cold is still there. But so is the rhythm. So is the peace. So is the silence. And the fish, well, you'll see it again tomorrow. And the next day. And the day after that. Because this is what it's like to eat fish every day in a medieval monastery. Holy, salty, repetitive, and surprisingly, calming. Now breathe in. Let the chanting echo somewhere in the back of your mind. Breathe out. The bells are silent, for now. Tomorrow, they'll ring again. And the fish will be waiting. Just like always. You wake up to the sound of thunder. Not literal thunder, just Brother Ambrose again. He's snoring through his nose like a blessed warhorse in the next cell over. The walls are made of stone, but apparently not the kind of stone that blocks noise. You'd ask him to roll over, but you've taken a vow of silence until prime, and besides, he's twice your size and smells like salted trout. So you lie there, eyes open, staring at the wooden beams above your head and wondering, as you often do, what fresh fishy horror the day will bring. The bell tolls for matins. Again. Because apparently, monks don't sleep so much as they nap in installments. You sigh, drag your aching limbs from the straw bed, which has, if anything, gotten more creatively lumpy overnight, and fumble for your robe. It's damp. Again. Because the humidity in this place is a constant. If you ever want something dried, you'd have to smuggle it into the fire and hope no one noticed the smell of burning linen. Outside your cell, the corridor is quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Just the kind of muffled dread you feel walking into a hospital waiting room or a Latin exam. You shuffle past Brother Godfrey, who gives you a polite nod that says good morning, and also I, too, am barely clinging to this mortal plane. You nod back. It's the unspoken language of monks. Down in the chapel, the chanting begins again. And here you are, kneeling. Again. The floor is stone, which is great for humility and less great for kneecaps. The air is thick with candle smoke and old incense. Someone nearby forgot to fast properly, because you can smell cabbage on their breath every time they exhale. A test of patience. Or maybe a spiritual assault. This is what monastic life is. Repetition, structure, silence, and fish. So much fish. You make it through matins, then lauds, and by the time the prime bell tolls, you've already prayed more times than most modern people do in a year. It's not even breakfast yet, and your soul is freshly scrubbed, rinsed, and hung out to dry like your damp robe. Eventually, the kitchen bell rings. Now, let's talk breakfast. Not the kind with eggs, toast, or those hotel buffets where the waffles are shaped like states. No. Breakfast here, if it exists at all, is penance in a bowl. And by bowl, we mean a wooden vessel that has been around since Charlemagne's third cousin took the cloth. You sit. You wait. You are handed your portion. Today, it's pottage. Again, barley and water, with a generous splash of don't ask. The consistency is somewhere between soup and regret. Floating within, a small, grayish chunk of fish. Probably yesterday's leftovers. Possibly older. Possibly something that once swam but has since transcended flavor entirely. You chew. You pretend not to notice the tiny bones. You tell yourself this is good for you. Holy, even. But deep down, a small part of your soul whispers the word cheese and you feel the sting of temptation. You look around the refectory. 30 other men, all doing the same thing. Some eat with grim determination. Others close their eyes like they're trying to make the taste disappear through sheer willpower. Brother Oswin, the skinny one with the unfortunate mustache, is already done. He always eats fast. Maybe he doesn't chew. Maybe he's just given up. There's no talking. A monk is reading aloud from a collection of saints' lives, a favorite genre in these parts. Today's saint once lived in a cave and subsisted on moss and wild berries for 20 years. You glance at your fish and think, well, at least it's not moss. After breakfast, it's work time again. You're on fish duty today. Lucky you. You get handed a slotted bucket, a very tired net, and a pair of sandals so old they might have served at the first crusade. The pond waits. You and Brother Hugo trudge out into the cold morning, the mist clinging to your sleeves like sad ghosts. The monastery's fish pond is about the size of a tennis court and roughly the same color as the inside of a hue. It smells like wet stone, rotten algae, and existential despair. The fish are carp, mostly. Fat, slow, unbothered by your presence. They drift lazily in the water like ancient souls waiting for reincarnation. You wade in. The water is cold enough to make your legs rethink their life choices. You lower the net. And you scoop. Carp are, objectively, some of the least cooperative creatures on earth. They dart. They hide. They flip dramatically, like underwater divas. After 20 minutes of flailing, you manage to net 2 fish. One looks slightly alive. The other looks like it already saw God and came back out of spite. Brother Hugo pats your shoulder. Better than last week, he says, breaking silence for just a second. You trudge back with your catch. The kitchen will take it from here, which is a nice way of saying descale, gut, and preserve using every method available except seasoning. These fish will be boiled, dried, salted, or if you're feeling fancy, roasted on a spit made of repurposed fence posts. Preservation is key in monastery life. You don't just eat fish when it's fresh. Oh no. You store it. Salt it, dry it, pickle it, bury it in vinegar, or soak it in brine until it develops the texture of damp canvas. Then it can be eaten all year long, during Lent, Advent, Ember Days, Vigil Days, and the 135 other days the church says meat is a no-go. Monks were basically the original meal preppists, just with more guilt and fewer Tupperware containers. You rinse the mud off your hands and head back inside. The bell rings for terce. More chanting. More kneeling. More bargaining with your knees. Afterward, you're assigned to the scriptorium, a room full of manuscripts, inkpots, quills, and quiet desperation. The scribes are copying theological texts. You're tasked with illuminating a capital letter. It's supposed to be a decorative G, but your version looks more like a confused goose in a toga. You hear someone cough behind you. Brother Anselm peers over your shoulder, squints at your goose, and walks away without saying a word. You feel judged. Fair. By midday, it's time for dinner. Or lunch. Again, time is a concept best approached with flexibility and prayer. You sit in the refectory. You wait. You are served. Today's menu features lentil stew, a slice of brown bread that might qualify as a weapon under medieval law, and, you guessed it, more fish. This one is smoked, which sounds exciting until you realize that smoke just means left over a fire for several hours until it resembles wood. It's dry. It flakes. It tastes like an old confession. You chew, and chew, and chew. You begin to suspect that maybe your fish is chewing back. Brother Cedric, across the table, has a small pile of bones on his plate. You have bones too. You always have bones. Eating fish in a monastery is a delicate act of faith and dental risk. You wonder if monks have a patron saint for choking hazards. Probably. After the meal, you return to the garden. More weeds. More compost. more conversations with turnips, which, at this point, are more emotionally available than some of your fellow brethren. You reflect. You wonder. You daydream briefly about roast chicken. Then you repent. Vespers arrives like a whispered apology from the day. Soft light. Gentle singing. The sound of robes rustling and souls exhaling. The chant loops endlessly, a sacred lullaby for the spiritually overcooked. You breathe in incense. You breathe out doubt. You kneel. You rise. And finally, you return to your cell. You light your candle. You fold your robe. You lie down. The mattress feels exactly like it did yesterday. Bad. But you're used to it. Your dreams tonight will smell faintly of vinegar and salvation. And just before you drift off, you hear it. The wind outside. The pond bubbling in the distance. And somewhere, in the belly of the monastery, another fish. Waiting. Because tomorrow, like every day, you will wake up. And you will eat fish. Again. And again. And again. Still with me? You wake up in a cold sweat. You've just had a nightmare about being force-fed eel pudding by Saint Benedict himself. He was very polite about it, but he insisted. Eat the jellied eel, he said, or be excommunicated. You tried to reason with him, but he was armed with a ladle and a very disappointed stare. It's still dark. You lie there for a while, listening to the gentle ambience of medieval suffering, a few soft snores, the creaking of wood, the wind moaning through ancient shutters, and the quiet gurgle of someone digesting last night's lentils in real time. The scent of musty wool and vague despair lingers in the air like the ghost of fish past. Eventually, the bell rings for matins again. Because God, apparently, doesn't believe in uninterrupted sleep. You shuffle to the chapel like a semi-sentient sack of regrets, kneel on cold stone, and listen to a 40-minute recitation of psalms, most of which you now know by heart and also hate slightly. Not because they're bad, just because your knees hurt so badly you start to see colors. Afterward, you limp back to your cell to stare at the ceiling and wonder why no one thought to invent mattresses before the Renaissance. So before you completely fade into unconsciousness again, now's the perfect time to quietly tap that like button. Subscribe if you find joy in long, fish-flavored monastic suffering, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know I'm narrating someone to sleep in Saskatchewan at 2:47 a.m. Back to your regularly scheduled penance. By prime, you're mostly awake and vaguely functional. You've accepted your fate, much like a goose accepts Christmas. Today's sky is gray. Again. Which is helpful, because now your mood matches the weather. You gather in the refectory for breakfast. The reader begins his morning droning about the life of St. Cuthbert, who once ate nothing but onions and survived a North Sea storm by sheer ascetic sass. Meanwhile, your bowl is filled with, it's white. Sort of. You poke it with your spoon. The texture is somewhere between overcooked gruel and ancient toothpaste. Congratulations. You're eating fish porridge. It's technically food. It might be made from cod, or herring, or whatever Brother Oswin found drying behind the chimney last week. It tastes like salt, sadness, and a vague memory of the ocean. You eat it slowly, trying not to inhale a fish scale. The monk next to you sneezes into his bowl and keeps going. There is no escape. Now, let's talk about fasting days. Which, plot twist, are most days. In medieval monasteries, the church calendar was a minefield of dietary restrictions. Out of 365 days, monks were forbidden from eating meat on at least 150 of them. During Lent, no meat. During Advent, no meat. On Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Ember Days, Rogation Days, and roughly every third Tuesday if the wind was blowing from the east, no meat. What do you eat instead? That's right. Fish. More fish. Only now, it's not just regular fish, it's humble fish. Lenten fish. Dry fish. Weak fish. The kind of fish that makes you miss the taste of your own tongue. On strict fast days, even dairy and eggs are banned, because apparently a chicken laying an egg is too flesh-adjacent for comfort. So you make do with water, legumes, and the spiritual strength of someone who absolutely does not want to be here. And that's when things get weird. See, medieval monks were experts at finding loopholes in fasting laws. Not because they were gluttonous, okay, maybe a little, but mostly because they were clever and hungry and surrounded by rules written in Latin. Take the beaver, for example. You'd think a beaver would be off the menu during Lent. It's got legs. It has fur. It builds dams. It does not, generally speaking, swim through oceans praising the Lord. But wait. Its tail is flat and scaly. It looks like a fish. Which was all the excuse some monasteries needed to classify beaver tail as aquatic meat, which was therefore acceptable on fast days. So yes, monks ate beaver. Legally. And with great enthusiasm. The taste? Reportedly oily, chewy, and not unlike salted boot leather. But it was different. Same goes for barnacle geese, a mysterious species that medieval people believed grew out of driftwood and thus weren't born on land. They were considered semi-marine creatures, like aquatic bonus birds. So yes, you could eat a barnacle goose during Lent. Because logic. And then, there were the otters. Not always allowed. But some monks found justification. After all, otters live in water. They swim. They dive. They're adorable. Which, in monastic terms, means they probably deserve to be eaten as punishment for existing with such smug, fish-like freedom. Of course, not all monks approved of this culinary creativity. Some took fasting very seriously. These were the ones who refused butter, flinched at lentils, and subsisted on moldy rye bread dipped in vinegar. You could always spot them. They looked vaguely translucent and smelled like wet flagstones. Meanwhile, the cleverer monks were in the back kitchens, finding ways to bake eel pies, trout pastries, and even fish custards, which, yes, was a thing. Imagine custard, but instead of sugar and eggs, you get mashed pike and maybe a prayer. Speaking of eels. Eels were the true MVPs of medieval fasting. They were everywhere. Cheap, plentiful, and willing to be smoked, stewed, baked, fried, or turned into disturbing jellied confections. A large monastery could consume thousands of eels in a year. They were so integral to the diet that sometimes monks were paid their wages in eels. You eat enough eel, you start to question things. Like your identity, your digestion, your sense of reality. But eels were useful. They didn't spoil quickly. They could be traded. And best of all, they were classified as fish, so you could eat them 150 days a year without getting smacked by ecclesiastical guilt. So yes, you eat eels. You eat carp. You eat salted cod, so old it might predate the Norman conquest. You eat dried herring that tastes like the inside of a knight's boot. And every now and then, if the monastery is wealthy or if you're celebrating a feast day, you get the holy grail of aquatic cuisine. Fresh salmon. It's rich. It's buttery. It flakes like heaven and doesn't stab your gums with tiny invisible bones. You only get it once in a blue moon, and it's so luxurious you half expect a choir to descend from the ceiling. You savor it in silence, locking the memory in the deepest corner of your soul to warm you on the 47th consecutive meal of pickled carp. But the day moves on. The bells toll. You return to the fields. You dig. You pray. You try not to think about barnacle geese. Dinner comes again, and with it, another mystery stew. You stir it slowly. The chunks are ambiguous. Possibly haddock. Possibly remorse. The monk across from you has already passed out into his bowl. No one moves to wake him. This is the way. And eventually, finally, you crawl back to your cell, wrap yourself in wool, and lie in the dark. You think about eels. You think about beavers. You think about how the fish are always watching. Because they are. Waiting. So when the bell rings again before dawn, you'll wake up and eat fish. Again. And again. And again. You wake up from a dream where you were being knighted by a trout. He wore a tiny suit of armor. His sword was a fishbone. And just before tapping you on the shoulders, he whispered, "You are now the Duke of Damp." Then he slapped you with a wet fin and disappeared into the mist, leaving behind only the lingering smell of old sardines and mild disappointment. You sit up. Your knees crack like an old manuscript being opened for the first time in 3 decades. You are, once again, awake in your medieval cell. The air is slightly warmer today, which means the dampness is now humid. A new texture for your suffering. Outside, the bell rings. It's time for lauds, which is Latin for praising the Lord before coffee existed. You shuffle into the chapel like a zombie in a choir robe and take your place on the cold stone floor. Another set of psalms, another round of kneeling, Another opportunity to contemplate your sins, your diet, and why your feet always feel like they're made of soggy bread. But today is different. Today is a feast day. Cue the Gregorian trumpet fanfare, which sounds suspiciously like the same chant as yesterday, but sung slightly louder and with more hopeful eyebrows. That's right. It's a holy day. And in the deeply repressed, gastronomically grim world of the monastery, this is the equivalent of Mardi Gras. Except instead of beads, you get turnips. Now, don't get too excited. It's still the Middle Ages. There's no cake, no streamers, no charcuterie board shaped like the Virgin Mary. But, miracle of miracles, today your meal will contain flavor, possibly even fat. Because when it's a major feast day, like the Feast of St. Benedict or a local abbey's patron saint, you're allowed to eat like an actual sentient being. And by that, we mean your fish might be cooked in butter. Take a moment. Let that sink in. Real butter. No apologies. No guilt. No silent judgment from Brother Ellard with his 3-inch hair shirt and superiority complex. Just warm, fatty, delicious butter. And if your monastery is even moderately wealthy, which in medieval terms means you have a garden, a fish pond, and more than one goose, you might even get something extravagant, like spiced fish pie, or fried eel with herbs, or almond milk fish stew, which sounds horrific but was a delicacy. Because in the Middle Ages, if you couldn't have dairy, you made your own from nuts, crushed and strained like your patients. You walk into the refectory and feel it instantly. There's a buzz in the air. Not the sound of joy. Joy is heretical, but something adjacent. Mild anticipation. Even the monk reading at the pulpit seems vaguely less miserable as he recites the story of a 3rd-century saint who was martyred by being force-fed figs until his liver gave out. Your bowl arrives. You peer into it and gasp. There are colors. Gold, from the butter. Green, from herbs. Maybe even saffron, if the abbot's feeling extra blessed. Saffron. The spice that costs more than your life and smells like divine sunlight. Where did it come from? How did it get here? Don't ask questions. Just eat. It's warm. It's soft. It has depth. Not just salt and regret, but actual layers. Nutmeg, maybe. A touch of clove? You chew slowly, reverently, like someone experiencing taste for the first time since childhood. A single tear rolls down your cheek. Brother Simon sees it. He nods knowingly. You are united in this moment of sacred culinary mercy. Because usually your meals are, well, functional. They exist to keep you alive and holy, not entertained. But on feast days, the monastery turns into something almost festive. The cooks pull out all the stops. The kitchen actually smells like food instead of boiled failure. Let's talk about what goes into preparing a monastic feast. First, the ingredients. Monks had access to whatever they could grow, raise, or trade for. That meant herbs from the garden, thyme, sage, parsley, fish from the pond, onions from the root cellar, and whatever spices could be afforded through trade, pepper, cinnamon, even a dash of ginger if your monastery had good connections with a spice merchant who wasn't too stingy. They'd grind the herbs with a mortar and pestle, stir bubbling pots over open hearths, and assemble fish pies with layers of dough and mystery. Often, fish was cooked in paste, a medieval term for encased in pastry so you don't have to taste it directly. Other options? Pottage, but the luxury version. Instead of water and barley, you get almond milk and ground almonds and maybe even raisins. Raisins. Dried fruit was a sign of abundance. It also made things vaguely sweet, which was as close to dessert as monks could get without risking eternal damnation. Some monasteries had chefs, yes, actual trained cooks, not just Brother Godwin burning things in a corner. These men were skilled in monastic cuisine, which is a real thing. It's like being a Michelin-starred chef, except you're forbidden from seasoning anything unless Jesus personally allows it. They prepared menus that fit the rule of St. Benedict, while still keeping monks from completely losing the will to live. But even on feast days, there were rules. No second helpings. No talking during meals. No licking the bowl. No dramatic sobbing when the pie is gone. Just quiet, holy, disciplined appreciation. Then there were the decorations. Not banners or bunting, too secular. But maybe a fresh cloth on the table. Or candles. Or someone remembered to sweep the floor. One time, someone carved a fish into a turnip and placed it at the center of the table as a decorative centerpiece. It was later eaten, because food is food. And then there's fish art. Yes, it's real. Monastic cooks occasionally got creative with presentation. Fish molded into other shapes. Pies shaped like sea monsters. Eel segments arranged into spirals. Because if you have to eat the same thing every day, you might as well style it like a medieval Pinterest board. One documented feast at a Benedictine abbey included lampreys in hot sauce, haddock in pastry with green herbs, burbot, a freshwater fish, in almond broth, salt cod glazed with honey and vinegar, and, inexplicably, sweet eggs molded to look like pears, which were forbidden during Lent but justified because they were educational. No one ever explained what they were meant to educate you on. Probably obedience. Now let's address the sacred cow in the room, meat. Technically, forbidden. But on certain major feast days, the Pope occasionally granted a dispensation, like a get-out-of-fish-free card, which allowed monks to eat poultry or even beef. Cue the angels weeping with joy. But here's the catch, even when allowed, monks often had to eat meat in a separate room, usually called the Monastery. Why? Because the monastic dining room was sacred space, and God, apparently, didn't want to smell roast chicken during Vespers. So you'd slink off to the Monastery like a medieval meat criminal, roast leg of mutton hidden under your cloak, chewing quietly and with much theological guilt. But not today. Today is a proper fish feast. And that means you go all in. You scrape your bowl. You lick the spoon when no one's looking. You smile, just slightly, and then immediately pray for forgiveness because smiling isn't encouraged. You walk out of the refectory not groaning, not grumbling, not thinking about how your internal organs have turned to barley paste. You feel, dare you say it, satisfied. And that's rare. So rare, in fact, that the monks will be talking about today's meal for weeks. In hushed voices, behind cloisters, in between prayers. Did you try the eel custard? I think it had cloves. Brother Hugo ate 2 pieces of fish pie and didn't even flinch. May God forgive him. And yet, by Compline, it's all a memory. The joy fades. The butter cools. And tomorrow is not a feast day. Tomorrow is dried cod and turnip mash and the ever-present aroma of fermented despair. But for now, you rest. Your belly warm. Your spirit fed. Your dreams haunted by pastry fish with tiny pastry eyes. And when you wake up again, it begins anew. Because there is always more fish. And always another day to fast, feast, or just chew through it all slowly. You wake up with a distinct feeling that someone has been frying something suspiciously gelatinous just outside your cell. It's not a dream. It's eel day. Again. You don't remember voting for this. But then again, you don't remember much of anything lately. The endless rhythm of bells, prayers, and Piscine cuisine has eroded your memory like a fishbone rubbing against the inside of your skull. And speaking of erosion, today, we're going to explore something especially sacred, unspeakably powerful, and profoundly absurd. The monastic kitchen. Yes, the epicenter of spiritual digestion. The bubbling cauldron of God-approved cuisine. The holy battleground of spices, grudges, and eel logistics. A place where saints were fed, secrets were kept, and absolutely no one was washing their hands. Before we go full boil, take a quiet moment, assuming your hands aren't currently covered in medieval fish grease, to like this video and subscribe. Only do it if you genuinely enjoy this kind of relaxing historical descent into culinary despair. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Seriously. I love seeing who's out there, voluntarily listening to eel stories at 2:47 a.m. Now let's descend into the smoke, the clatter, and the anxiety of the monastery kitchen. You enter through a door that creaks like a judgmental bishop. The smell hits first. It's a blend of smoked fish, damp rushes, wood smoke, onion steam, and someone's attempt at making cinnamon sauce using what is almost certainly just bark and desperation. There's a low haze hovering in the air. The cooks are already sweating. These aren't Gordon Ramsay's kitchens. These are stone-walled furnaces of chaos. The hearth is wide and always burning, because cold fish stew is a form of penance too grim for words. Cauldrons hang over open flames. Fat sizzles. A monk is frantically whipping almond milk with a bundle of twigs tied together like an ancient whisk. Another is gutting a trout with the precision of a surgeon and the attitude of someone who hasn't slept in 4 days. This is Brother Berenger's domain. He doesn't speak often. But when he does, it's either to shout about salt rations or to mutter, "God's wounds, who left the conger eel on the floor again?" He's been cooking in the monastery kitchen for 37 years. No one remembers when he started. He just was. Like mildew or Gregorian chant. And if you think being a monk cook was a humble gig, think again. The kitchen was a place of power. Food was everything in a monastery. It wasn't just sustenance. It was religion. It was ritual. It was, in many cases, a full-time job for multiple monks, lay brethren, and often hired help. Larger monasteries even had kitchen hierarchies. The kitchener was the monk in charge of the whole operation. He managed supplies, supervised the cooking staff, and made sure Brother Stephen wasn't secretly eating goose legs under his robe. Then there were the assistant cooks, the fish preppers, the spice keepers, and the cellarero, an all-powerful figure who controlled the stores, wine, oil, and preserved fish. Think of him as a medieval grocery manager with divine authority and a terrifying ledger book. Food was rationed carefully. Every fish, every dried herring, every pot of honey had to be accounted for. Because nothing, not even God, provoked more monastic rage than a missing pike. Now, let's talk about eel economics. Because, yes, that was a thing. In fact, in some monasteries, particularly in England, eels were currency. You heard that right. Monks paid rent in eels. Feudal landlords often accepted eels as payment. Sometimes thousands of eels. There are actual medieval records of tenants owing 500 eels and a goose as annual rent. Eel farming, eel fishing, eel storage, this wasn't a side hustle. It was big business. Why? Because eels were abundant, easy to preserve, and shockingly versatile. You could roast them, boil them, bake them into pies, or mash them into paste. They were basically the tofu of the Middle Ages, soaked in sauce, taking on the flavor of whatever you season them with. Assuming, of course, that you had seasoning. Which, let's be honest, was mostly salt and prayer. Some monasteries built entire eel traps, long stone channels in rivers or artificial ponds, designed specifically to catch the squirming little demons as they migrated upstream. Monks would gather them in baskets, clean them in cold water, and pack them in salt for storage. Preserved eels were stacked in barrels and sealed like treasure. Only instead of gold coins, you got tubular fish flesh that smelled like a wet rope left in the sun. But hey, it was profitable. You could trade eels for wine, or parchment, or candles, or repairs to the roof of your chapter house, which had been leaking since 1173. Monasteries even sent eels to royal courts. Yes, royal courts. Dear His Majesty, enclosed please find 300 salted eels. May your reign be long, and your digestion peaceful. Even taxes were sometimes paid in eel equivalents. The Doomsday Book, the famous land survey ordered by William the Conqueror in 1086, includes over 500 mentions of eel rents. This wasn't just cuisine. This was infrastructure. And you? You're peeling onions. Your hands are sticky. Brother Berenger has assigned you to pottage prep, which sounds harmless until you realize it involves standing over a boiling cauldron of split peas, fish trimmings, garlic, leeks, and whatever root vegetable hasn't yet surrendered to mold. You stir slowly, as instructed. Clockwise. Always clockwise. Counterclockwise stirs invite demons. Or worse, spoiled texture. The fire belches smoke into your eyes. You cough quietly. Brother Stephen tells you to pray harder. Behind you, a novice is attempting to debone a carp. Poorly. Bones are flying. Scales are everywhere. Someone's sleeve is on fire. You try not to breathe through your nose. Because the combination of stewed fish, old sweat, and medieval sanitation is potent. A little like a sauna in a fish market. Or like God opened a can of sardines and walked away for 6 centuries. Still, there's something comforting here. The rhythm of a chopping. The hiss of bubbling broth. The clack of wooden spoons against iron pots. The occasional Gregorian hymn hummed under breath like an ancient culinary soundtrack. Because no matter how grim the fish, how gritty the leeks, how existentially cursed the eel pie may be, this is still your monastery. Your kitchen, your fish, and your eternal penance. Now, not all fish are created equal in this holy hierarchy. Some, like Stygian, were luxury. These were massive, armored beasts that could feed an entire chapter of monks and still leave leftovers. But they were rare, expensive, and often reserved for royalty or special feasts. Others, like herring, were the working-class heroes of the Piscine world. Cheap, plentiful, and salty enough to preserve for months. Herring was the bread and butter of monastic fish cuisine. Literally, you could spread it on bread. Add some turnips. Pretend it was a sandwich. There were also tench, pike, bream, lamprey, again with the lamprey, perch, and barbel, each with its own role in the rotating fish apocalypse that was your menu. And let's not forget the miraculous loopholes. When monks got tired of regular fish, they turned to medieval culinary theology. Because sometimes birds were fish. Yes, in a stunning act of religious logic, certain animals that lived near or on water were declared acceptable during fast days. That included beavers. Beavers were considered fish-adjacent due to their aquatic lifestyle and scaly tails. So you could, in theory, eat a beaver tail stew during Lent and remain technically pure. Some monasteries took it even further and lobbied to have barnacle geese classified as fish, claiming that since they were born from driftwood and barnacles, they weren't real birds. Spoiler, they were wrong. But points for creativity. As the day goes on, the kitchen settles into a warm rhythm. Bowls are filled. Pies are baked. Brother Berenger starts yelling less. You even sneak a spoonful of broth and manage not to cry. Dinner is served just before Vespers. You sit in silence. The fish stew is lukewarm. The bread is hard. But it's yours. And as you chew, slowly, contemplatively, staring at a smear of pottage on the tablecloth that looks vaguely like the face of Saint Jerome, you realize something. You've survived another day in the monastic kitchen. You've stirred the sacred pots. You've braved the fish economy. And you've made peace with your place in the ancient, eternal cycle of broth and belief. And just when you think the day is done, Brother Berenger appears behind you. Tomorrow, he says solemnly, we smoke herring. You do not flinch. You merely nod. You are dreaming of cheese. Hard cheese. Soft cheese. Cheese that melts. Cheese that stretches. Cheese that doesn't stare back at you. And then, tragedy. You wake up, and you're still in a monastery. Still wearing a robe that smells faintly of damp wool and spiritual defeat. And still surrounded by fish. It's another day. Another sacred sunrise. And another opportunity to ask yourself, how did I end up here? What life choices led me to voluntarily eat herring in silence for 27 years straight? Because today's chapter isn't about what's on your plate. It's about what's not. Welcome to the part where we explore the psychological toll of eating the same thing every single day, until even your dreams smell like salted cod. Before we marinate too deeply in your suppressed emotions, do the usual YouTube pilgrimage. Like this video if you enjoy drifting off to tales of historical fish-based suffering. And subscribe if you'd like more soothing, sarcastic sleep history. Tell me in the comments what time it is where you are, and if you've ever dreamt about fish. I promise not to judge. We've all been there. Now back to your regularly scheduled monastic food crisis. You're sitting at the long refectory table again. Same bench. Same bowl. Same unfortunate liquid inside it. You pick up your spoon and stare into the void. It stares back. It has flakes. You sigh the sigh of a soul who has chewed the exact same spoonful of fish pottage roughly 11,000 times over the last 30 years. You've memorized every possible texture a herring can take on. Crunchy. Slimy. Charred. Suspiciously chewy. Exploding. You once bit into a pike eye by accident. You haven't been the same since. There's something quietly soul-dismantling about monotony, especially culinary monotony. And while monks were known for their piety, humility, and wildly passive-aggressive notes about who wasn't washing their bowl properly, they were also experts in repetition. Prayers? Repetitive. Chants? Repetitive. Meals? Absolutely, mind-numbingly repetitive. Fish was the one constant in a sea of spiritual impermanence. And not even fancy fish most of the time. Not grilled with lemon and herbs. Not lightly pan-seared over artisan charcoal. No. We're talking boiled gray trout paste served lukewarm, with boiled barley and the occasional dead insect. The medieval monastic diet made airline food look like Michelin star delicacy. You weren't allowed meat, remember. And in many monasteries, that rule was taken very seriously. The rule of Saint Benedict was interpreted to mean no meat from four-legged animals, which basically left you with birds, fish, and divine imagination. You could have eggs and dairy on non-fasting days, but that depended on the order. Some monks followed stricter interpretations. Cistercians, for example, often went harder than necessary. No meat, no eggs, no dairy, just fish. Forever. Fish and vegetables in a grim ballet of blandness. So it's not surprising that your dreams have started getting weird. You've had visions of a roast chicken wearing a halo. You once woke up whispering butter into your pillow. Brother Ellard claims he had a vision of a giant cheese while chasing him down the cloister and offering him salvation. You believe him. You've seen that cheese too. Your subconscious is starting to rebel. Because your body knows, deep down in your marrow, that you were not meant to eat pickled eel for breakfast. The average monk ate twice a day, once around 10 a.m. and again in the evening, often after Vespers. That's right. You're waking up for matins at 2 a.m., praying for 6 hours, working in the garden, chopping onions, smoking fish, cleaning cloisters, and copying psalms, and your first meal is at 10. This isn't intermittent fasting. This is eternal fasting. And when the meal finally comes, oh, it's thrilling. You get a piece of bread, stale, a bowl of fish stew, chunky, and maybe, if the celero is in a good mood, some leeks. Sometimes, they'll shake things up with a different fish. Once, they served perch instead of eel. You wept. Out loud. Another time, during Lent, someone misread the delivery and brought dried squid instead of smoked herring. The kitchen didn't know what to do with it, so they boiled it with garlic and mustard seeds. It was chewy. But at least it was different. You're not the only one unraveling, by the way. There's a kind of quiet fish madness that creeps into monastic life. Brother Thomas has started naming the fish in the stew before eating them. Brother Martin claims he can identify the species of fish just by sniffing the steam. Brother Wilfred insists he hasn't eaten in 4 years and is instead sustained by light. He's definitely stealing bread at night. Even the abbot has taken to muttering about herring insurgencies. And these are holy men, men of learning, of scripture. But give anyone enough smoked mackerel and barley porridge, and they'll start questioning reality. Sometimes, when things get really bad, when the pottage is particularly slimy, or the broth tastes like regret, monks start writing passive-aggressive marginalia in their manuscripts. You've seen it yourself, tiny notes in the corners of holy texts that read things like, "May the cook be forgiven, for he knows not texture." Or, "This parchment was copied by a starving mun. Pray for me." In one particularly worn prayer book, someone had written, in Latin, "O Lord, deliver us from another meal of lamprey." Underlined. Twice. But of course, complaining out loud was frowned upon. You're supposed to be grateful, humble, detached from earthly cravings. But you're also human. And when you've spent 14 straight months eating fish pottage for dinner, you start to fantasize about literally anything else. Salted pork, cheese with mold on purpose, a date, not the fruit, a social event. You once dreamt of biting into a warm, buttery croissant and woke up biting your own sleeve. It was not buttery. Even smells become traitors. One time, a traveling bishop visited the monastery and he was allowed meat. Cooked in a separate room, of course, because if monks even smelled roasted lamb, the theological crisis could trigger a small schism. But oh, you smelled it. Roasting meat. Fat crackling. That golden, greasy scent of cooked animal flesh wafting through the cold corridors like the Holy Spirit itself. You sat at your table, chewing salted fish paste, while the smell of roast duck danced mockingly through the cloister. It was the closest thing you felt to spiritual rage. And yet, despite it all, you return, every day, to the same bench, the same bowl, the same suspiciously opaque stew. Why? Because it's your duty. It's your calling. And also, you're too weak from fasting to run away. Over time, you start to experience taste fatigue, a phenomenon where the brain literally tunes out repeated flavors. Everything starts to taste the same. You could be eating eel, or carp, or the ghost of St. Anthony's sandals. It wouldn't matter. Your taste buds have given up. They're somewhere else now, probably enjoying grapes in a better timeline. So monks found ways to break the cycle, even within the rules. You learn to smuggle in herbs from a garden. Mint, parsley, wild garlic, even dandelion greens, chopped finely, can make a pottage feel like an exotic vacation. Some monks became spice smugglers. Cloves and cinnamon were expensive, shipped overland from the east, worth more than gold. But if you knew someone who knew someone, you could get a pinch. Just a pinch. Enough to make the stew taste like something. Once, Brother Cedric managed to steal saffron from the infirmary. The resulting dish was described as a revelation. He was caught. He spent a week in penance, copying the rule of Saint Benedict by hand 48 times. But no one blamed him, because for one brief, golden meal, the fish tasted different. And that was enough. So you keep going, day by day, spoon by spoon. Not because you love the food or because you developed a taste for eel spine, but because this is the life you chose. A life of discipline, of simplicity, of pious gastrointestinal monotony. And if you close your eyes, if you chew slowly enough, you can almost imagine that the pottage is chicken. Roasted, crispy-skinned, golden brown. You let the illusion hold. And then Brother Berenger yells from the kitchen, more turnip stew. And the dream shatters like a dropped pewter bowl. But you smile anyway, because tomorrow is another day. And with any luck, there will be trout. You are not a bad person. You are, however, a person who has just eaten cold pickled eel paste for the 4th time this week, and so you are also a person who is considering things, unholy things, like cheese, or sausage, or breaking into the abbot's larder at night with a candle and a dream. Because here's the quiet truth monks don't chant about in Latin. While the monastery rulebooks were full of noble dietary guidelines and holy restrictions, monks were still, underneath the robe, people. And people get hungry, especially when dinner tastes like salted boot water. So tonight, we're digging into the seedy underbelly of monastic dining. The secrets, the whispers, the suspiciously full bellies during Lent. Because where there are rules, there are also loopholes. And where there are loopholes, there's cheese. But before we start this ecclesiastical food heist, remember to like this video and subscribe if your soul is nourished by sarcastic medieval suffering. Drop a comment telling me what time it is for you, and whether you've ever committed a fish-related crime. It's okay. You're safe here. Now, back to your regularly scheduled spiritual rebellion. You're sitting in your cell after Compline. The candles have been snuffed. The cloister is quiet. The pottage is digesting, slowly, in protest. And then you hear it. A soft knock. 3 taps. A pause. 2 more. It's Brother Piers. He's holding a cloth bundle under his robe, looking like someone who definitely should not be holding a cloth bundle under his robe. Do you want to see something blessed? He whispers. You nod. He opens the bundle. And there it is. A sausage. Real. Pork. Sausage. Still warm. Slightly greasy. Smells like heresy and happiness. You stare at it like it's the relic of Saint Gastronomus himself. You haven't seen pork since you entered the monastery. And now it's here, in the shadows of your cell, glowing like forbidden treasure. How? Well, let's talk about that. You see, not every monk was a saint. And not every monastery was a fortress of virtue. Some were more like, well, medieval office politics with incense and very bad fish. So what did monks do when they couldn't stand one more mouthful of pottage? They got creative. Let's start with the oldest trick in the book, the infirmary exemption. If you were sick, you were allowed special food. The rules were clear. Sick monks required different diets. More calories. More comfort. Fewer bones. So what did monks do? They got strategically ill. Not contagious. Just vague. Slight cough. Chronic tiredness. Mysterious aches. Nausea that only responded to roast chicken. Brother Oswin has been unwell every 3rd Wednesday for the past 6 years. No one questions it anymore. He even has a special bowl. And that bowl gets eggs. And butter. Once, someone even spotted a biscuit. Brother Oswin calls it the grace of frailty. Then there's the guest loophole. Whenever important visitors showed up, bishops, nobles, very serious men with feathered hats and unrealistic expectations, the monastery would slightly upgrade its cuisine. For the guests, of course. Not for you. You were supposed to sit quietly and pretend you didn't smell roast quail. But some monks, let's just say, made themselves available during these visits. Do you need someone to carry that tray? Oh no, I insist. Shall I fetch more wine? Perhaps a small bite for the bishop. Suddenly, Brother Everard is mysteriously chewing something crispy in the hallway and refuses to make eye contact. There were entire hierarchies of sneaky nibblers, monks who knew which guests tipped in leftovers, which visitors hated fish and left behind their meat, which servants could be bribed with favors or secret psalms. It was an ecosystem of silent trades and hushed gratitude. Then there's the kitchen mafia. You didn't hear this from me. But if you had access to the kitchen, and not just during your rota to peel onions while silently weeping, then you had power. Power to sneak. Power to taste. Power to withhold. And sometimes, power to alter records. No one really knows what happened to that shipment of salted butter that went missing last Michaelmas. But Brother Humphrey has looked suspiciously well-fed ever since. Glowing, even. There's also the practice of spiritual interpretation. Some monks, particularly in wealthier monasteries, got creative with the rules. The rule of Saint Benedict said no meat from four-legged animals. Fine. So someone asked, what if it's technically not meat? You see where this is going. Meat jelly, meat broth, meat-infused lentils. There's a record from the 12th century of a monastery that banned meat, but allowed pulses cooked in beef water. Yes, they boiled beans in meat stock and insisted it wasn't meat because, quote, no teeth touch flesh. A loophole worthy of modern tax lawyers. Some monks went even further and decided birds were fish adjacent. Because, and I quote, they live near water and have feathers, which are like scales. That's right. Ducks? Fair game. Puffins? Oh, absolutely. They live on cliffs. Basically fish. Swans? Eaten with divine justification and served with fig sauce. Then you had feast days, which happened a lot. Saints' days. Special Fridays. The arrival of relics. The anniversary of Brother Barnabas not dying that one time. There was always something to celebrate. And on those days, the rules bent. Just a little. More bread. More oil. A spiced fish here. A honey turnip there. And sometimes, if the abbot was in a generous mood and no one was actively dying, a tiny bit of cheese. Just a sliver. But to you, it tasted like salvation. Of course, none of this was officially allowed. But it was tolerated. Because, frankly, a monastery full of starving, fish-delirious monks was not a peaceful monastery. You can only chant so many psalms on an empty stomach before someone starts reenacting the Book of Job in the cloister. So little indulgences were managed. Quietly. Unofficially. With the same kind of smiling denial your grandmother uses when pretending she doesn't add sugar to her unsweetened tea. Now, let's talk black market eggs. It started as a rumor, then as a whisper, then as a soft cluck heard behind the scriptorium. One day, a novice, too young to know better, followed the sound and discovered it. A chicken, hidden in a basket, tended lovingly by Brother Matthew. She was named Juliana, and she laid precisely one egg every 2 days. And that egg? It was passed around in secret, boiled, salted, shared like a Eucharist of defiance. You only got a bite. But, oh, the texture, the whiteness, the fact that it did not taste like trout. Eventually, someone snitched. Probably Brother Osmond. He's never trusted birds. The chicken was confiscated. But the legend of Juliana lived on. And years later, you still find little carvings of her in the margins of hymnals. Always smiling. Always laying. Not all monasteries went full black market, of course. Some were genuinely austere. But even in the most disciplined abbeys, the temptation of real food was constant. There were stories, passed down like campfire legends, of secret feasts held in the woods. Rogue monks who smuggled in wine. Priors who kept private stashes of cured meats under their beds. One tale spoke of a monastery that held an entire underground banquet during Lent. 30 monks. 6 chickens. 1 roast lamb. They chanted Psalm 23 while carving it, "The Lord is my shepherd." And truly, they lacked nothing that day. Until someone wrote it all down in the margins of a calendar and it was discovered years later. The abbot was not amused. But even he couldn't help but ask, was the lamb tender? And so you learn the balance. Between obedience and hunger. Between silence and chewing. between the official rules and the quiet, unspoken understanding that sometimes God would understand, especially when you're just trying to survive another day of boiled gray pottage. So tonight, you chew your dried fish. You smile at Brother Pierce. You share the contraband sausage in sacred silence. And you sleep knowing that, yes, tomorrow will probably be trout again. But tonight you tasted rebellion. And it was delicious. You wake up, not because the bell rang, but because of voices, dozens of them, in the courtyard, chattering, laughing, some of them wearing shoes so clean they might as well be illegal. You look out the narrow stone slit that passes for a window in your cell. And there they are, visitors, wealthy ones, with gloves, with cloaks, with opinions. One of them is pointing at your dormitory and whispering to a companion like it's a safari. Another is sipping something that smells suspiciously like cinnamon. There is laughter. There is silk. There is even, horrifyingly, a small dog in a jeweled collar. You look around. Where are the monks? Oh, right. They're scrubbing the floors. Because today is Fish Friday feast day. And your monastery is famous. Not for its piety. Not for its manuscripts. But for its fish. So yes, somehow, your life of cold trout and hard benches has become a spiritual tourism hotspot for wealthy nobles seeking penance, enlightenment, and also the best smoked salmon this side of the channel. How did this happen? Let's break it down. It started, as most bad ideas do, with a miracle. Long ago, when your monastery was young and still mostly mud and ambition, a monk was said to have had a vision. In the vision, he saw a golden fish. The fish told him to build a pond. He did. The pond filled with fish. Lots of them. Like, too many. Some said it was divine. Others said it was just excellent hydrology. Either way, word spread. And nobles, rich, superstitious, hungry nobles, began to arrive. They donated land. They offered silver. One of them even gave your abbey a bell made of solid bronze in exchange for a single blessed eel. And your monastery leaned in. Hard. The fish ponds expanded. The kitchens grew. The fish got fancier. What started as a simple holy meal turned into a medieval tasting menu. Think, salted pike with fennel sauce. Poached lamprey in almond milk. Pike pate served in a carved bread crust shaped like St. Peter. It was all still technically within the bounds of the rule, because it was all fish, but it was also, unmistakably, fine dining. Now let's talk about these ponds. Monastic fish ponds were engineering marvels. Dug by hand, lined with stone, fed by carefully redirected streams. Each pond had different species, different temperatures. Some for breeding, some for fattening, some for very exclusive dinners with high-paying pilgrims. You, of course, are not allowed near the fancy ponds. You get your fish from the muddy trench near the back, where the carp are blind and swim in circles out of sheer depression. But the visitors? They get the top-tier trout, the elegant perch, the lamprey that's been fed breadcrumbs soaked in wine. There's even one sturgeon, named Reginald, who allegedly performs miracles. Though really, he just surfaces when you tap the water 3 times. Still, pilgrims come just to watch him. They toss in coins. You once saw someone toss in a ruby ring. You're still mad about it. Then there's the Abbey Fish Market. Every Saturday, the lay brothers haul out the best catches and arrange them artfully on slabs of polished wood, right at the gate. And the nobles, fresh from their palfreys and moral compromises, come shopping. They ask absurd questions. Is this trout free range? What's the mercury level in this herring? Do you have any eel with a hint of fig? You try not to laugh. But one time, someone asked if the fish were emotionally blessed, and Brother Aldhelm had to excuse himself and weep behind the smokehouse. Let's talk about the monks running the show. Brother Prior, who hasn't smiled in 15 years, suddenly becomes very agreeable when the bishop's retinue arrives. He makes small talk. He quotes St. Augustine. He personally hands out little slivers of glazed salmon on bread rounds, like a Benedictine maitre d'. Then there's Brother Sebastian, who's technically a scribe, but somehow always ends up carving pike fillets whenever nobility visits. He insists it's part of his outreach ministry. You've seen him take a bite before serving, just to check for flavor. He winks. You judge him, but not too harshly. Because sometimes, just sometimes, a leftover poached eel tail ends up in the refectory for the monks to share. And for 3 blessed minutes, everyone forgets about pottage. Now let's get into the dark side of all this culinary holiness. Because with popularity comes corruption. Yes, even in monasteries. Especially in monasteries with 7 ponds and a non-site smokehouse. Some monks begin to live a bit too well. Not scandalously, just comfortably. Brother Remigius, for example, has somehow acquired a feather mattress and a jar of preserved lemons. Brother Cuthbert no longer chants in the mornings, he conducts. And someone, no one will admit who, commissioned a new mural of St. Peter catching fish, where the fish looks suspiciously like a sea bass with gold leaf eyes. The visitors, meanwhile, become bolder. One noblewoman insisted on a private room and a personal monk to recite psalms while she nibbled on smoked tench. Another asked if the monastery offered gluten-free spelt wafers. A German merchant demanded a tour of the fish cellars and then tried to haggle over prices. One time, a French bishop brought his own chef, and the 2 kitchens had a cook-off. The monastery won. But barely. The abbot declared it a friendly exchange of culinary philosophies. You heard him cry that night in the chapel. Eventually, the Pope catches wind of all this aquatic indulgence. He sends a letter. It's full of words like temperance, modesty, and what are you doing with the almond milk? The abbot posts it on the wall. No one reads it, because they're too busy preparing for Lent, the monastery's biggest season. Lent, of course, is when monks are supposed to suffer. But here, Lent is when the fish menu gets truly unhinged. 40 days of no meat means 40 days of aquatic creativity. There's salted cod in every form, pike pie, eel fritters, dace dumplings with garlic cream. One year, Brother Lawrence created a 7-layer fish tranche, and people wept. A monk from another abbey fainted after tasting it. There was an investigation. He was fine. He just hadn't had flavor in 13 years. You, meanwhile, continue your simple life. You scrub. You chant. You try not to steal leftover fish skin from the nobles' plates. But you dream. You dream of the day your name is added to the kitchen rota. You dream of seasoning. And sometimes, when no one is looking, you sneak down to the pond at night and whisper secrets to the fish. They understand you. They know what it's like to be admired, but never eaten. Because even in a monastery, food is never just food. It's power. It's status. It's the only thing keeping the bishop's entourage from noticing that the library hasn't been updated since the Black Death. So the next time a visitor arrives and says, "I've heard the fish here is divine," you smile. And you nod. And you think to yourself, you have no idea. You wake up in a cold sweat. Not from a nightmare, but from the smell. Something is off. Your nose, which has grown tragically adept at distinguishing between 13 types of damp mold, instantly detects it. Not mildew. Not the usual fermented cabbage tang of Brother Godfrey's laundry. No, this is fish. Rotten fish. Not just a little off fish. Not someone forgot the salt fish. This is full, aggressive, slap you in the soul, decaying aquatic corpse fish. You groan. You throw on your robe. You shuffle toward the refectory, the scent growing stronger, more violent, more accusatory. At the threshold, you find the culprit. It's sitting right there on the table. A trout. Or what's left of it. Grayed, sunken-eyed, crusted in what can only be described as medieval regret. Brother Anselm is poking it with a spoon, his expression somewhere between despair and culinary betrayal. Brother Walter has backed up against the wall, muttering the Lord's Prayer in reverse. And Brother Julian, the boldest among you, is holding a sprig of rosemary in front of his face, as if that will save him from the biohazard currently attacking everyone's nasal cavities. You approach. You sniff. Instant regret. So here we are, the dark, bloated underbelly of monastic fish consumption. Because when you eat fish every single day, things are bound to go wrong. Storage, for example. There are no fridges in the 13th century. There are only barrels, pits, and what passes for a cool corner of the cellar, which is roughly the same temperature as a dog's armpit in July. Your monastery does what it can. Fish is salted, smoked, dried, pickled, or fermented in big wooden vats that look suspiciously like they once held bodies. And might still. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes the barrel leaks. Sometimes someone forgets the brine. Sometimes someone thinks it's only been 4 days, surely the salmon is fine, and then half the chapter hall is vomiting before Vespers. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Let's explore some of the methods of fish preservation and exactly how they failed you. Salting was the most common. Fish packed in thick layers of coarse salt, left to draw out moisture until they resembled something between a shoe and a punishment. Rehydration took hours, sometimes days. The resulting meal was a chewy, salty block that somehow still managed to taste slightly of despair. When done right, it could last months. When done wrong, it could last until someone died. Smoking, meanwhile, added flavor and shelf life and made the monastery smell like a barbecue pit built by monks who'd never tasted joy. But the smokehouse had its own hazards. Like when Brother Cedric tried to innovate by adding herbs to the fire. The fish turned green. People got excited. Then people got sick. Then Brother Cedric wasn't allowed near fire again. Drying was the simplest method. Leave the fish out in the sun and hope for the best. Unfortunately, the best didn't always happen. Sometimes, flies beat you to the finish line. Other times, rain hit mid-dry and turned your stockpile into a maggot fondue. You once found a beetle the size of a coin inside a haddock. You named him Marcus. He lived longer than the fish. There was also pickling, of course, fish soaked in vinegar or brine, often with onions, garlic, or mustard seed. This was a relatively safe method, and also made the fish taste like it had already been eaten once. Brother Oswald called it a divine tang. Brother Oswald had lost all his taste buds in a previous lentil incident. And then, there was fermentation. This is where the monks got experimental. One year, someone tried burying carp in a clay jar with garlic and honey for 6 weeks. The jar exploded. Twice. We don't talk about what happened in the infirmary after that. But the wall still smells funny. Let's not forget transportation. Because as the monastery grew famous, fish was no longer just caught on site. It was brought in, from rivers, markets, sometimes even the coast. That meant travel, which meant time. And fish, you may recall, does not enjoy travel. It doesn't like horseback. It doesn't like ox carts. It definitely doesn't like being wrapped in straw and jostled for 80 miles in August. More than once, a shipment of mackerel arrived looking more like soup than fillet. Brother Hamo insisted it was fine once boiled. Brother Hamo no longer cooks. Then came the scandal. Ah yes, the trout incident. It started with a banquet. The bishop was visiting. There were guests, nobles. One of them even brought a lute player. Everything had to be perfect. And the centerpiece? A giant river trout, caught 2 days before and kept on ice. Ice, in this case, meant buried under snow in a basket behind the scriptorium. Spoiler, it was not cold enough. The trout was baked, stuffed with herbs, glazed with honey and lemon peel, served with flair. Everyone complimented it. The abbot beamed. Then, the noises began. Groaning, sweating, clutching, running, whimpering. By Compline, 3 monks were down. By midnight, 7. The bishop left at dawn, pale, furious, and deeply betrayed. He would not return for 10 years. You now refer to that trout, simply, as the betrayer. Brother Simeon wrote a poem about it. O sacred trout of golden skin, that turned within to sin and din. Thou promised much and gave but grief, a stomach storm beyond belief. It's terrible, but everyone applauded, because you were too weak to argue. After that, new rules were imposed. Fish had to pass the smell test. Officially, there was a designated fish sniffer. His job was to assess all incoming or aging fish and declare them edible or condemned. It was a high-risk, low-reward position. Brother Adalbert held the post for 14 days before losing all olfactory sensation and most of his dignity. Still, it helped. The poisoning rate dropped. Only 1 monk died that year. Unrelated, turnip accident. But the trauma remained. You now flinch slightly every time someone says fresh trout, even if it's metaphorical. Now, let's talk about what all of this did to your soul. Because spiritual growth is hard when your gut is in open rebellion. You sit through services with a bloated belly. You chant the Psalms while burping faintly through your nose. You start having dreams where St. Peter is a fishmonger who judges you for your choices. At one point, you're sure the cloister garden smells like cod. It doesn't. But your mind is broken. Eventually, you accept it. You embrace the rot, the uncertainty, the dance with digestive danger. Because this is life. This is penance. This is monastic gastronomy. And sometimes that means you might die from a flounder. And that's okay. You lived well. You scrubbed the cloister. You memorized 12 psalms. You only stole one smoked herring. And you replaced it with a rock of similar weight. In the end, you sit beneath the stars, breathing in the clean, fishless night air, and whisper, "Thank you, Lord, for not serving trout today." And somewhere, in the stillness of the night, you swear you hear a distant glove. Possibly a blessing, possibly a warning. But either way, you're too tired to care.